Welcome to Subtext, where we talk to storytellers about the creative process and the meaning behind the work. I'm your host, Kathleen Eull, author, publicist, and owner of Pyxcis Creation Solutions, a firm specializing in helping to amplify the voices of small press authors of all genres. I'm joined today by author Nancy Flinchbaugh and to talk with her about her new novel, Mariah of the Wind. Nancy is also the author of a series of spiritually themed books featuring a group of characters known as the Magnificent and Marvelous Book Club, and those titles are Revelation in the Cave, Revelation at the Labyrinth, and Revelation in the Roots, Emerald Isle. She's also written a memoir, Letters from the Earth, and Awakening, a contemplative primer on learning to sit. In addition to her work as an author, Nancy is active in social justice causes, a graduate of the Shalem Institute for Spiritual Formations program on leading contemplative small groups and retreats, as well as being a certified labyrinth facilitator with Veriditas. She joins us today from her home in Springfield, Ohio. Nancy, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you and be with you this morning.
Nancy, you have such a full story of your own. I'm wondering if you can start us off by just telling us a bit about yourself and when and how you got into writing.
Well, I felt a call early in my life to serve God and people, and that kind of morphed over time into working for peace and justice. And I completed a career working in municipal government as a fair housing and mediation coordinator, where I coordinated intercultural programming. But somewhere along the line, I scheduled a retreat with some of my friends, and they told me, Nancy, you're a writer, which was a little bit of a surprise to me. But I came home and I thought, okay, they had recommended the book, The Artist's Way. And I started this early morning practice with the Julia Cameron's book, and I started writing. And one year I decided I was going to write a novel with God, and that became Revelation in the Cave, and it's continued to grow from there.
Oh, that's a great story. Sometimes we don't see our own gifts.
Yeah.
Other people have to give us a nudge sometimes. Tell us a little bit, give us a snapshot of the new book, Mariah of the Wind, for people who maybe have not had a chance to read it yet.
Well, I call this an environmental novel. It's about a young woman, Mariah, who is in love with the earth, as I love the earth. And so you walk with her through the seasons, and it's a love story. She encounters a wind scientist who's grieving, Max, who lost his wife and daughter in a tragic accident. So it's their story, but it's also about the changing climate and the wind. The wind, as it picks up on our planet, it also stirs up a lot of things. And Mariah was named after the wind, and Max is a wind scientist. And there are people trying to suppress wind as a form of alternative energy, which is one of Max's projects with his friend Buck. And so it's also about how people from the fossil fuel industry are hiring people to scare climate scientists and those working in alternative energy. So this book, it's a hopeful book. One of my early reviewers say, if you like happy endings, you should read this book. But it's my attempt to write an important book that lifts up the beauty of the earth while also calling us to address climate change.
Now, this is your fourth novel, correct, Nancy?
Right.
What made you take on the topic of climate change now?
Well, actually, the topic of climate change has been really important to me for a long time. And 4 of my books directly talk about climate change. And as the planet heats up, I think it's crucial for us to speak up and address the problem. Like today, while I speak, we've been having smoke from Canadian fires. There's a flooding that's been happening in Vermont. You know, the Southwest in the United States is really hot. It's making it very hard for people, as well as I hear Italy and Greece have been experiencing a really hot summer this year. So, you know, the effects of climate change seem to be rapidly affecting all of us. So I just think it's important. I try to write books that matter. In fact, my press for my last two books has been All Things That Matter Press. I think, I try to write books that people will enjoy, pick up, and that will make them think and get more involved in addressing the problems facing us as people on this planet.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the heat wave in Europe and North America, and certainly a book that's well timed, I think. Perhaps people who have been a little reluctant to really admit the realities of climate change. This might change. This summer might change their thinking, and I think your book does strike a hopeful note on that. Now, you've talked about how you've been involved in social justice for a long time. Did that impact or inform how you decided to write this book?
Well, I think that as at my church, I'm on a creation justice team, and we consider the issues with the earth to be a justice issue. Okay. So in terms of that, yes, it's impacting poor people first. Marginalized people are feeling they don't have air conditioning. They may live in developing countries where they are close to the water and the rising sea level affects them more quickly. But so I guess, yes, in that way, the justice, and also as a Christian, in the Bible, it says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And I'm concerned about how my country particularly is allowing money to rule, and the fossil fuel industry is driving a lot of things in our government and trying to confuse people about what's happening. And I think they should be invested in alternative fuels. So I think that's a justice issue, that we are not taking care of the place where all of us live, and it's affecting us all.
Right. Yeah, I think that's well said. Now, I don't think it's a spoiler. COVID figures into this book. Did you start writing this Mariah of the Wind during COVID? Is it something that came to you, when you actually started writing after the pandemic? What made you determine to include it as a plot element?
Yes, I was writing during the pandemic, and COVID affects us all, it was affecting us, still is affecting us in a lot of ways. And I worked at the city and they sent us home. And so I was working from home, and, I continued my practice of writing before work, but it just seemed appropriate to include the pandemic. And I was trying also to kind of write a way to maybe solve the pandemic, as everybody was scrambling, how can a small town deal with the pandemic in a way that minimizes the impact. So I was kind of doing research about that, what could be done.
Did you find it helpful processing your own feelings about the pandemic to be writing during that time?
Yeah, I think it's always cathartic to write what's going on around you and putting it into words so that it's real. Howard, my fossil fuel troll, gets put in a cabin at the state park, which is what we were actually doing here in Springfield in Clark County. When people were diagnosed with COVID, they were putting them out at the state park in nice cabins and feeding them and trying to isolate them. And so, yeah,
that's interesting.
This was my reality, and I kind of wrote about it, and it helped me, I guess, process everything.
Okay. Yeah. No, Native American elements also figure strongly in your story, specifically those of the Shawnee tribe. If I remember my history correctly, that tribe was prominent in Ohio, where you're living. Did you need to do a lot of research on this, or was this something you already had some background in? And how did you go about ensuring that you brought in these elements in a way that would honor the indigenous people?
Well, yes, I do live on Shawnee land, and so I wanted to honor that in my book, and I did do research to find out some of their stories related to the earth and tried to reflect them as well as I could, as well as giving them a place of honor in my book. The family one of the families had a Shawnee ancestor, which they had minimalized and tried to hide. And she was brought out to light and actually used in their business logo. And I tried to make it a strong, positive message of the Shawnee. And I'm always inspired by the Native American tradition of honoring 7 generations forward and not doing anything that will harm the future for the 7 generations. And I think that's a teaching that we all need to hear loud and clear right now to try to work towards sustainability on our planet.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I agree. Grief is also a theme in this novel, and it's explored from many perspectives. Max is a widower. There are a number of different ways in which grief, is displayed in this novel. Could you talk a little bit about that? Is that a motif you set out to explore, or did that just sort of arise naturally as you were doing your writing?
Yeah, I don't plot everything out, and it was something that just kind of developed as I wrote, that there was grief, and I think grief's a part of all of our lives, and we deal with losses. And so I wanted to incorporate that as it emerged that Max was grieving and Buck was grieving and Mariah was grieving also in some ways the loss of her father and her mother and moved out of town. So there's I think a theme within our lives of the loss, and I just tried to portray that as authentically as I could, building, from my own experience of grief. I think my largest grief was losing my mother. It's like, and so I've experienced that and walked through that also.
And Mariah of the Wind is classified as Christian fiction. So that's where you'd look for it at your bookstore or on Amazon. What would you say to readers who normally wouldn't read in that genre, who might be reluctant to pick up something classified as Christian fiction? And how might this be different than what they might be thinking of in terms of that genre?
Well, I am a Christian, and my main character, Mariah, is a Christian. And Max struggles with his faith as a widower who also has a young daughter. I think that Mariah's spirituality grounds her, and she lives with Mrs. B, who's a spiritual lady, also married to an Episcopal priest, now deceased. So you see some faith in these characters, but this isn't a book that's trying to convince you to become a Christian, but rather the faith in this book comes in admiring and caring for the earth. And it's about a spiritual life that involves loving others and working to make the world a better place. So I know a lot of people are opting out of church these days, but personally, I find church to be a place of hope that helps me grow. But I don't think it's I don't know. I think it's a Christian book without hitting you over the head with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And would you say the book would appeal to people from any tradition?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I don't think that the Christianity in it is such that's meant to exclude. I believe that Jesus was very inclusive and loving, and it's more a part of their lives than it's not a message to become a Christian in the book, but just a part of their lives. And it's a deeply spiritual book, I think.
Yeah, when I was reading it, I found it, because this was my first time reading anything in the genre, and I found it to be a really soft touch, how you handled that. And yeah, it was clearly a part of characters' lives, but not, not in an aggressive sort of way in the book. And I like that, because you could kind of meet that on your own terms. So yeah, I would encourage people to take a look. Switching now a little bit to talk more about your process. In previous interviews and recently in a blog post, you mentioned that meditation is an important part of your writing process. Now, I myself am a writer and author and a certified meditation teacher, so of course this interests me a lot. And I'd like to know, if you feel comfortable, could you share a little bit about what your own meditation practice is and how you feel it specifically aids your creative process?
Okay, well, I do meditate 20 minutes every morning before I write. And as a Christian contemplative, I believe that I'm sitting in the presence of God as I meditate, and that God's spirit is a source of deep meaning and love and creativity. I read once a Presbyterian author said, "Those who are close to God long to create." So I journal after I meditate, and I do the morning pages, as I mentioned, with Julie Cameron. And then I think that provides great clarity to me and peace and a connection to God's spirit. And it's really hard maybe to explain why the way meditation changes my life, but I feel like it's quite miraculous. And it definitely informs my writing in a somewhat mysterious way. So I've written a book on Christian contemplation practices, and I also include it in various ways in my writing. My first book, Revelation in the Cave, ends at a conference of mystics on Patmos. And my second book, Revelation at the Labyrinth, involves the labyrinth as a spiritual practice, which I really enjoy. And I actually created a labyrinth for my church that we use quite frequently. And my third book, Revelation in the Roots of Mariah, involved a silent retreat in Ireland at a retreat center. And then I also have my book, Letters from the Earth. And that's a little quirky, but I received these letters from the earth, or Gaia, as she signs her name, which I really believe they're from God. I receive them after I meditate. So there's a spiritual space, I think, that's created by opening yourself in meditation. And I think that, yeah, I say I write with God, which I don't know if that's audacious or not, but I feel like that's what I'm trying to do in my writing, is to speak important things that God is speaking to us and wanting us to do. So.
Okay, thank you. That's a lovely answer, and really kind of gave us some insight into how you think about it. I love that. Now, you're a contemplative retreat leader as well. Do you ever bring writing practices into how you lead retreats, or is that not something that you do when you lead a retreat?
I think just in terms of journaling, I encourage people to journal after each exercise we do. Like one exercise I really like is Lectio Divina with the earth, where, the monks use Lectio Divina as a form of contemplative listening to scripture, which I like to do too. But you can also open the holy book of nature where God's word is written and listen. So in that, I think some wonderful things emerge as people take time to listen, to observe nature, to see what speaks to them, and then to see what the message is for them today, and then to meditate on that and sit in silence, and then to journal about it. I've written poems after I've journaled, and I encourage other people to do it. So mostly that way in terms of journaling.
Okay. And so you would encourage anyone watching today that if they're interested in writing or taking their writing practice, different places, that journaling is a good practice.
Yeah, I think so. I think it just helps you think through your life. And that's why I continue to meditate and to journal, because it just brings kind of anything that's bothering you can write about it. I get ideas, I brainstorm on my pages, and it's a very helpful practice to be present with yourself, to listen, and to move into your life with meaning and clarity.
Yeah, I did journal for a long period. I haven't lately, but I do often recommend it to people. Kind of staying with your process, what was the hardest part of this book for you to write? And what do you hope the book is, what is its impact on readers? What are you hoping for there?
That's a good question. It's been a while since I wrote it. I think the hardest part maybe was the romance between Mariah and Max, and trying to do that in a way that honored both of them. Max, in the process of grief, he had just lost his wife and his daughter, and Mariah had really kind of closed herself off to relationships. And then, I don't know if this is a spoiler, but she gets pregnant on their first night together. And so that's kind of it was a difficult thing that happened, that maybe I wasn't planning to have happen, but it created an issue for both of them, and trying to write that mindfully and, thinking about how both of them would respond to something like that.
So it sounds like you definitely let your characters kind of take the lead on the story. You don't, as you said, you don't plot. So do you start out with your characters first, or an idea for the story first, and then just kind of follow?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I've written 3 novels with the MAMS, the Magnificent and Marvelous Books Club, and I wanted to get out of that mold and try something different. And I just am kind of in love with the earth. I just, I do gardening, and I'm a photographer. I love to take pictures, and I wanted to do something that kind of celebrated the earth, and I wanted to try to write about that beauty too. And so I just lost my picture from yeah, so that was kind of where I started. And then I wanted to write about, as we talked, the climate change in some way. And so it evolved. I did not have a clear idea of where I was going with that. And so things happen as I write. I guess there are 2 ways. Some writers plot everything out, and I tend to let things happen. And so I didn't know exactly what was going to happen until it happened.
Makes it an interesting process for you too, right? As we talked, you mentioned when you were describing the novel, Mariah, she finds herself in nature. And in fact, there's a beautiful line in which you describe Mariah's sense of being the wind that really resonated for me, also having been born in the autumn. Around October. And the line is, and always when she greeted autumn, she came home to herself, born on the cusp of the wind in the season of change. And I just thought that was just such a beautifully evocative line. And you've talked about your own love of nature. What is your favorite season? And do you have a favorite place in nature that you like to go?
Well, probably autumn is my favorite season, because I love the change and the significance and the cooling days and the beauty of the trees, and just seeing how nature prepares for winter. My favorite place in nature, I say, my favorite place in the world is in my own backyard in my hammock. I love to lay in my hammock and look at the trees. We have some trees that we probably let grow too close to the house, but they just provide this wonderful canopy, and the birds are always chirping, but it's just a place to relax. I can fall asleep there and take a deep breath. It's just, there's no place like home. I don't have to leave my own yard to see the beauty of nature.
And there's something about trees, isn't there?
Yeah.
Just you can feel, you can just feel, at least I have always felt they really connect you, I guess, ancestrally through time, because they are so old.
Yes.
Okay, for fans of the series, are you planning another installment of the Magnificent and Marvelous Book Club series?
I am currently writing another installment, which is Revelation on the Sea Island. And in this novel, Abigail, who's our conservative Christian man, she discovers in Revelation in the roots that she has African roots. And so she is going along with the Mams and some of their group home members to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina to explore her Gullah roots, the African people who were kidnapped and brought to the United States as slaves. They are sometimes called the Gullah or Gullah Geechee people. because of the culture they brought along from West Africa. So I'm kind of trying to explore that culture a little bit in the book, and Abigail, Priscilla is exploring her roots, and then also some of the other characters, Reagan and Welby, who figured prominently in Revelation and the Roots, are also important parts of this book, as Reagan is learning about her own African ancestors, and Welby is from the South, and so he's going back to some of his Gullah roots.
Now, this is, it sounds like there's a lot of research involved in each of those books. Now I understand the MAMs are have become an actual book club group. Is that correct?
We do have a group that meets at my house once a month, but we've been meeting for about 10 years. But we are not the actual MAMs and fictitious MAMs.
Okay.
We are real people, and we read books, a variety of books. And each time we read a book, I write a study guide for it and post it on my website. And I allow each of my fictitious MAMs to comment on the book as well as I comment. But nice. Yeah, so there is a real group, but the fictitious group it's a little different than our real group.
Okay, well, and finally, where can people find the study guides for the MAMs books and learn more about you, more about Mariah of the Wind, and your retreats?
Well, you can look on my websites. I have nancyflinchbaugh.com and also spiritualseedlings.com, which has a lot of stuff up on there. But if you click on the MAMs Book Club on the left side, you'll see the list of all the books we've read in the last 10 years, and the study guides are right there if you click on a particular title. I have Nancy Flinchbaugh Author Facebook page and a flinchbaugh.nancy Instagram. I'm just getting started on TikTok, which is like a new venture for me.
That's a whole nother thing.
Think of myself as Spiritual Seedlings Nance, and somebody's challenged me to post every day this week. So I'm just working on that, getting started. And I also have a YouTube channel where I have a lot of interviews that I've done, particularly with my Awakening contemplative primer on learning to sit. In the first year after that book was out, I tried to interview somebody every month about a different theme in the book. So to kind of extend the learning. And then also with my Revelations in the Roots, Emerald Isle, which was about, in part, racism and our political division, I started interviewing people on speaking about race, because I think it is important to speak up about race and also about climate change. I haven't started those interviews yet, but I've interviewed some of the people I know that are speaking out about race. And one of my really good friends, who was African-American, passed away last year. And so I'm doing those as a tribute to her. And we also just had a couple MAMs book clubs on books that she liked, called My Grandmother's Hands and also Mindful of Race. So those, haven't posted Mindful of Race yet on my website, but I'll be doing that.
Well, I'm sorry about the loss of your friend, but it sounds like you're remembering her in a really lovely way.
Yeah, we're also working on writing a book about her life. Her name was Winky Mitchell. She was truly an incredible person here and worked a lot with me when I worked at the city. When we were doing training, we did dialogue circles. We did the Global Education and Peace Network together. She was on our Human Relations Board and my mediation board. But she was just such an amazing listener and facilitator, and spoke up for justice and for human rights and for people, children. She loved children.
Okay, well, lovely. And Nancy, I think we'll leave it there. I thank you for your time. And I encourage people to check out your books and all the resources that you've mentioned. Check her out on Facebook, on her website, and now TikTok.
Yeah, I'm going to become more active on TikTok. Book Talk.
Okay.
Well,
Okay,
thank
Nancy,
you so much,
thanks so much.
For future episodes of Subtext, Talking with Storytellers, please visit Pyxcis Creative Solutions on the web at www.pyxiscs.com.